It's April! This month's video theme is techniques that fool the eye, that fake you into thinking that they're one thing when they're really another. So this week I'm going to show you how to do a fake graft. As always, if you want to jump right to a specific point in the video, there are direct links down in the description. Let's get started. A real graft is the invisible join of live stitches between two pieces of fabric. So this blue piece of fabric was knit separately from this green piece of fabric, and then a graft was created using the purple yarn here. When you look at the reverse side of the fabric, it looks as continuous on the back side as it does on the front side. It looks like it was one piece of fabric that was continuously knit. A fake graft is a relatively invisible join of two finished pieces of fabric. So on the right side of the fabric, it looks almost as if it was one continuously knit piece of fabric. But on the back side, you can see that this is actually a seam because you can see the finished edges on the back side. There's a bind off edge here and a cast on edge here. So you have that, that little bit of depth here that causes the fabric to slightly curve a little bit. With the real graft, you want the grafted line of stitches to be equal in size to the stitches on either side of the graft. With the fake graft, you want the same situation. This is really just seaming thread that has not been pulled taut. So you want to create a row of stitches that follows the stitches on this side of the fabric to this side so that the line of stitches is contiguous across the seam. When you begin seaming, you need to pay attention to the edges that you're seaming together. So you need to know whether you're seaming two bind off edges together, two cast on edges together, or a cast on edge to a bind off edge. So if you are going to be seaming a bind off edge to a cast on edge, then position them like this so that the bind off edge is below this. This will be the seam line. So the bind off edge is below the seam line and the cast on edge is above. So when you have a bind off edge below the seam line, you want to come up through the center of the selvage stitch. So you'll be coming up through the center of the V of this stitch. Come up through the center, pull the yarn through. When the cast on edge is up here, you're going to come up through the fabric between the selvage stitch and the second stitch in. So you're coming up, so you're going to see those two stitches of the selvage right here. You're going to pull up. From here on, you're always going to go down through the fabric where you would come up before. So you look through the seaming, for the seaming yarn, you're going down through there, and then you're catching two strands, two stitch legs here, pulling the yarn up. At this point, you're not going to be pulling the yarn tightly. So you're going to go down and catch two stitch legs again. Always looking for where you came out before. So go down through here, catch two stitch legs. And so on. When you're finishing the seam of a bind off edge to a cast on edge, you catch the two stitches as you would before when you're coming up through the last stitch. You're going to come around both stitches of the selvage on the upper part, and then you're going to finish by going down through the center of this last stitch. So you started by coming up through the center and then doing the two stitch catches all the way through, and then you end by going down through the center of the bottom stitch. When you seam two bind off edges together, you're going to start the same way you started the other one, where you come up through the center of the selvage stitch. So you come up through that, and then you're going to look for the V across. So you want to see this V. So you will actually be coming down in the center of the selvage stitch. So there will be one strand to the right here, and you'll be catching 2 strands immediately on this side. And from there, you're going to be repeating the previous process where you catch 2 strands on each side, always going down through the fabric where you came up before until you get all the way across. When you're seaming 2 bind-off edges together, the ending goes like this. We're catching 2 strands right here. And then we're going to catch our 2 strands here. And then we're going to finish by going through the top just the one time. So we create a half stitch in this direction. When we seam 2 cast on edges together, we start in a very similar way to the way we began before. But this time, when we come up through this bottom edge, we're coming up through the center of the first V that we can see, but you'll see that there are 2 strands on the side here instead of 1 because of the orientation of the original knitting. So we come up through the center, we've got 2 strands over there, pull our yarn through. And then on this upper part, we come up between the 2 stitches, between the selvage stitch and the second stitch in. So we have 2 strands on this side here. We go down where we came up the last time, catch 2 strands, and then pull the yarn through. Go down through the fabric, catch 2 strands, pull the yarn through all the way across. So to end, we're going to go down, catch the 2 strands of the selvage stitch, pull the yarn through, that completes the bottom, but then we come back up and we go through the top here, and that completes that seam. We end up with a half stitch at the top here. Now what we have to do is tighten up the seaming stitches a little bit on all of these because they haven't been completely tightened. They've been kept pretty loose just to make sure that we've got our stitches completely aligned as we seamed. So the way I like to do it is I like to start in the center of the seam and then work out toward the edges, tightening up the tension. I find that a little bit easier, puts less stress on the entire length of the seaming yarn. So I start in the middle and I just kind of pull up a little bit on the yarn to tighten up this leg, and then I come over here, pull some slack out. If I feel like I've pulled too much out, it's fairly easy to get it back in again. But I work my way all the way across until I get to the end. So I've tightened this half up a bit. I wanted to show you though that this is a bind off edge to a cast on edge. And when you do that, the vertical edges are even. When we did this one, this was 2 bind off edges together. The edges are offset by half a stitch because this is a bind off edge and that's a bind off edge. So the purple stitches were knit toward the blue yarn and the green stitches were also knit toward the blue yarn. So they were knit in opposite directions relative to each other. So the orientation of these V's is different. So this is the way this was actually knit. So you have half a stitch over here and half a stitch over here. If you remember, we ended the seam of the two bind off edges together by ending at the top. We brought like a half stitch up there. We also did that for the two cast on edges where we ended the seam by coming up to the top. So these 20 stitch swatches have a 19.5 stitch seam. So the other half stitch for this piece of fabric is over here, and the half a stitch for this piece of fabric is over here. So this half stitch offset occurs because the direction of the knitting was opposite, either both toward the seam or both away from the seam. If you're picking up stitches later along this edge, then that isn't going to be a problem. It may or may not be a problem if those edges would remain exposed. Well, I hope you learned something about fake grafting that you didn't know before. If you enjoy what you're seeing on my channel, please subscribe, and thanks for watching.